I never thought a broken heater in the middle of December would change my life. But here we are. I'm sitting on my couch right now, coffee in hand, and I can still feel the ghost of his presence in this apartment, even though he left just an hour ago. My heart is doing this weird flutter thing it's been doing for weeks now, and I need to tell someone about this. I need to process what's been happening between me and Caspian, my neighbor from across the hall. It started 6 weeks ago on a Thursday night. I remember because I'd just gotten home from a brutal shift at the hospital where I work as a physical therapist, and all I wanted was to collapse on my couch with leftover Thai food and mindlessly scroll through my phone. But the universe had other plans. My apartment was freezing, like I could see my breath freezing. I checked the thermostat, and it was reading 48 degrees. The heater had died. I stood there in my scrubs, exhausted and cold, seriously contemplating just going to bed fully clothed under every blanket I owned. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway, and without thinking, I opened my door. Caspian was coming up the stairs with grocery bags, and when he saw me standing there looking pathetic, he stopped. We'd been neighbors for about 4 months at that point. We had that typical neighbor relationship where you smile, say hi, maybe comment on the weather. I knew he worked in software development because he'd mentioned it once in the elevator. I knew he liked to cook because I could sometimes smell amazing food coming from his apartment, and I knew he was straight because I'd seen him with a girlfriend a few times early on, though I hadn't seen her in a while. What I hadn't let myself acknowledge was that I'd developed this ridiculous awareness of him. Every time I heard his door open, my attention would snap toward it. I'd find myself timing my comings and goings to maybe bump into him. I told myself it was just friendly neighbor stuff, that I was just being social, but deep down, in that place I didn't want to examine too closely. I knew it was more than that. So there I was, standing in my doorway looking miserable, and Caspian set down his grocery bags and asked if everything was okay. I explained about the heater, and he immediately said he could take a look at it. Before I could even process what was happening, he'd put his groceries inside his apartment and was standing in my living room asking where the heating unit was. I led him to the closet where the furnace lived and watched as he crouched down to examine it. He was wearing this dark green Henley that brought out the color of his eyes, and when he reached up to adjust something, the shirt rode up slightly and I had to physically turn away. This was not okay. He was my straight neighbor doing me a favor, and I was standing there noticing the way his shoulders moved under his shirt. He worked on it for maybe 20 minutes, and I hovered awkwardly, offering tools and trying to make small talk. At one point, he asked me to hold a flashlight, and I crouched down next to him, and suddenly we were very close in that small closet space. I could smell his cologne, something woody and clean, and I became hyper-aware of every point where we almost touched. Finally, he sat back and wiped his hands on his jeans. He said he'd fixed a connection issue, and it should work now. We waited, and sure enough, I heard the furnace kick on. I was so relieved I could have hugged him, but I settled for thanking him profusely. I offered him money, food, anything, but he just smiled and said it was no problem. That's what neighbors do. Then he didn't leave. He stood there in my living room, hands in his pockets, and asked what I'd been planning for dinner. I told him about my sad leftover Thai food, and he laughed. He said he'd just bought ingredients to make pasta carbonara, and he always made too much anyway. Would I want to join him? I should have said no. I should have maintained that neighbor boundary. But I was cold and tired, and the thought of spending more time with him made something warm bloom in my chest. So I said yes. His apartment was a mirror image of mine, but felt completely different. He had this warm, lived-in quality to his space. Books everywhere, plants on the windowsills, art on the walls that looked like he'd actually chosen it, not just bought whatever was on sale. He moved around his kitchen with easy confidence, and I sat at his counter watching him cook, drinking the beer he'd handed me. We talked. Really talked. Not neighbor small talk, but actual conversation. He told me about growing up in Oregon, about how he'd moved here for work 3 years ago. I told him about my job, about the satisfaction of helping people regain their mobility after injuries. He asked thoughtful questions. He listened in this intense way, like what I was saying actually mattered to him. And when he laughed at something I said, his whole face lit up and I felt it like a physical thing in my chest. The pasta was incredible. We ate at his small dining table and the conversation never lagged. At some point I realized it was past 11 and I should go, but I didn't want to. Neither of us seemed to want the night to end. Finally, around midnight, I forced myself to leave. I thanked him for dinner and for fixing my heater, and when we said goodnight at his door, there was this moment where we just looked at each other and I couldn't read what was in his eyes, but it made my pulse quicken. That night, lying in bed in my now warm apartment, I admitted something to myself I'd been avoiding. I had feelings for Caspian. Real feelings. The kind that made my stomach flip when I heard his voice. The kind that made me replay every word he'd said, every smile, looking for meaning that probably wasn't there. And it was hopeless because he was straight and my neighbor, and this was exactly the kind of situation I'd promised myself I'd never get into again. But the universe apparently has a sense of humor because that dinner became a regular thing. 3 nights later, I bumped into him in the hallway and he mentioned he was making stir-fry. Did I want some? The next week, I ordered pizza and knocked on his door to see if he wanted to split it. It became this unspoken routine. A few times a week, we'd have dinner together, either at his place or mine. I learned so much about him during those dinners. He was thoughtful and funny, with this dry wit that would catch me off guard and make me laugh until my sides hurt. He was passionate about his work, but not defined by it. He loved hiking and photography. He had a sister he was close to who lived in California. He'd been in a relationship that ended about 6 months ago, and when he talked about it, there was hurt there, but also acceptance. Like he'd made peace with it. And the more time I spent with him, the harder I fell. It was torture and bliss all at once. I looked forward to our dinners all day. I'd find myself smiling at random moments just thinking about something he'd said. But there was also this constant ache because I knew it couldn't go anywhere. He was straight. This was friendship. I needed to get my feelings under control. I tried to create some distance. I started saying no to dinner invitations, making up excuses about being busy or tired. I'd hear him in the hallway and wait a few extra minutes before leaving my apartment so I wouldn't run into him. It lasted about a week and a half before he knocked on my door one evening. When I opened it, he was standing there with this concerned expression. He asked if everything was okay, if he'd done something wrong. He said he missed hanging out and was worried he'd overstepped somehow. And God, the genuine concern in his voice just about broke me. I assured him everything was fine, that I'd just been busy with work, and even as I said it, I could see he didn't quite believe me. But he nodded and asked if I wanted to grab dinner tomorrow, and I couldn't say no to his face. So we fell back into our routine, and I tried to just accept it for what it was. Friendship. I could do friendship. I'd had crushes on straight guys before and gotten over them. This would be the same. Except it wasn't, because those other times I hadn't spent hours talking with them, learning their thoughts and dreams and fears. I hadn't seen them first thing in the morning when we'd both be getting coffee at the same time, hair messy and eyes still sleepy. I hadn't had them look at me the way Caspian sometimes looked at me, with this expression I couldn't quite name. Things shifted about 4 weeks after that first heater incident. We were at my place, sitting on my couch after dinner, and somehow the conversation had turned deep. We were talking about loneliness, about how you can be surrounded by people and still feel alone sometimes. Caspian said something about how his last relationship had ended, partly because he'd felt like he couldn't be fully himself, like there were parts of him he'd kept hidden. I understood that feeling more than he knew. I'd come out when I was 23, and it had been this huge relief and also terrifying. My family had been mostly supportive, My friends too, but there was still always this awareness, this slight guardedness in certain situations. I told him some of this, not all of it, but enough that he got quiet and thoughtful. Then he asked me something that made my heart stop. He asked if I'd ever had feelings for someone I couldn't be with. The way he asked it, looking down at his beer instead of at me, made me wonder what he was really asking. I said yes, of course. Hasn't everyone? He nodded slowly and said he thought he might be going through that right now. He said it was confusing because it wasn't what he'd expected and he didn't know what to do with it. I should have left it alone. I should have made some generic supportive comment and changed the subject. But my stupid, hopeful heart made me push just slightly. I asked what was confusing about it. He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, and said he'd been thinking about things differently lately, questioning things he thought he knew about himself. The air between us felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. I couldn't breathe. I didn't dare move or say anything that might break whatever moment this was. He opened his mouth like he was going to say more, then seemed to think better of it and looked away. The moment passed. We changed the subject. But something had shifted, and we both felt it. After that night, there was this new awareness between us. Conversations would have these pauses where we'd just look at each other. We'd be sitting on the couch and our legs would touch and neither of us would move away. Once, reaching for the same bowl of popcorn, our hands brushed, and I swear I felt electricity shoot up my arm. The tension was becoming unbearable. I started having these vivid dreams about him. I'd wake up with my heart racing, the ghost of Dream Caspian's touch still on my skin. I felt like a teenager again, consumed by a crush I couldn't control. I'd be at work, helping a patient through exercises, and my mind would wander to the way Caspian's eyes crinkled when he smiled. It was affecting my sleep, my concentration, everything. Then last week, everything came to a head. It was a Friday night, and we'd made plans to watch a movie at his place. I showed up with beer and found him on his couch looking stressed. When I asked what was wrong, he said his sister had called, and she'd been asking about his love life, pushing him to get back out there and date. He said he'd tried to explain that he wasn't ready, but really, that wasn't the full truth. I sat down next to him, probably closer than necessary, and asked what the full truth was. He looked at me with these vulnerable eyes and said the truth was he'd developed feelings for someone, but it was complicated. He said he'd never felt this way before, not exactly, and it was making him question everything he thought he knew about himself. He said he was scared of ruining something important by wanting more than he should. My mouth was dry. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I asked him who it was, even though some part of me already knew, hoped, prayed. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached out and took my hand, threading his fingers through mine, and just held it there on the couch between us. He was shaking slightly. So was I. I looked down at our joined hands and then up at his face. He was watching me with this mixture of hope and fear that I'd never seen before. I asked him if he was sure, if he knew what he was saying. He said he'd never been more sure of anything, even though it terrified him. He said he'd been falling for me since that first night over pasta carbonara, maybe even before that. He said every time he saw me, his day got better. He said he couldn't stop thinking about me, dreaming about me, wanting to be near me. I told him I felt the same way, that I'd been trying so hard not to feel this way because I thought it was impossible, that I'd been falling for him too, so hard it scared me. His eyes got bright and he smiled, this beautiful, genuine smile, and he squeezed my hand tighter. Then he leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, and kissed me. It was soft and tentative at first, questioning. I kissed him back, answering that question with everything I had. His free hand came up to cup my face, and the kiss deepened, and it was everything I'd imagined, and so much more. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard, and he rested his forehead against mine and let out this shaky laugh. He said he'd been wanting to do that for weeks. I said I'd been wanting him to. We spent the rest of that night on his couch, talking and kissing and figuring out what this meant. He was honest about his fears, about being new to this, to being with a man. I was honest about my own fears, about falling for someone who might decide this was too hard or too different. We promised to be patient with each other, to communicate, to take things at whatever pace felt right. That was a week ago. Since then, we've been in this beautiful bubble of new relationship energy. We're taking it slow in some ways, letting him adjust to this new understanding of himself. But in other ways, it feels like the most natural thing in the world. He still comes over for dinner, but now he kisses me hello and goodbye. We still talk for hours, but now we do it curled up together on the couch. He holds my hand without hesitation now, in his apartment, in mine. Yesterday, he asked me to go on a real date with him this weekend. Dinner at a restaurant, the whole thing. He said he wanted to take me out properly, to show me that this isn't just convenience or experimentation. He said he's falling in love with me and he wants to do this right. I told him I'm falling in love with him too, have been for longer than I want to admit. This morning, my heater made a weird noise, and I texted him about it, joking that he might need to fix it again. He showed up at my door 10 minutes later with his toolbox, checked the heater even though it was working fine, and then stayed for coffee. We sat at my kitchen table in our pajamas, talking about our plans for the day, and it was so domestic and perfect it made my chest ache. He's gone now, off to meet a friend for lunch, but he'll be back tonight. We're going to cook dinner together at his place. It's become our favorite thing, working side by side in the kitchen, stealing kisses between chopping vegetables and stirring sauce. Last night, he told me he's grateful his ex-girlfriend broke up with him because it led him here. To this. To us. He said he feels like he's finally understanding who he is, and a huge part of that understanding involves me. I never expected this. I'd resigned myself to these feelings being one-sided, to loving him from a safe distance. The fact that he feels the same way, that he was brave enough to explore these new feelings despite his fear, that he chose me, it's almost too much to process. I keep waiting to wake up and find out it was all a dream. But it's real. He's real. This thing between us is real. And yeah, we'll have challenges ahead. He's still figuring out his sexuality and what all of this means for his identity. We'll have to decide when and how to tell people. There will be moments of doubt and fear and uncertainty. But we'll face them together. I'm sitting here in my warm apartment, the heater humming along perfectly. And I'm thinking about how the best things in life come when you least expect them. How sometimes the person you need is right across the hall. How a broken heater on a cold December night can lead to the kind of love I'd stopped believing I'd find. My phone just buzzed. It's a text from Caspian. Just 3 words. Missing you already. I'm smiling like an idiot as I type back that I miss him too. In a few hours, I'll walk across the hall and knock on his door. He'll answer with that smile that's become my favorite thing in the world. He'll pull me inside and kiss me hello, and we'll cook dinner together and talk and laugh and build this beautiful thing we've started. All because my heater broke and he offered to fix it. All because he stayed even after it worked. All because we were both brave enough to admit what we were feeling. I never thought I'd be grateful for a broken heater, but here I am, thankful for every moment that led me to this one, to him, to us.